Every sentence that I've read about this event has been crazier than the last. 172 years ago, there was a giant Victorian tech expo of sorts held in London, and a third of England attended it. Yet I'd never heard about it until now. There was an amazing guest list, an incredible building, and thousands of bizarre inventions on display. Some of them would go on to change the world, and some of them were just plain weird. The event was called the Great Exhibition of 1851. It was the first in a series of world fairs that have been held all over the world and are designed to showcase the great achievements of various nations. These fairs have been a spectacle many times and are actually still held today, with the next one being in 2025 in Japan. France had already been running its own events for a few years, showing off products of French industry, and the British were quite inspired by this, especially Prince Albert, who was the husband of Queen Victoria. Prince Albert became one of the main organisers of this great exhibition and saw it as a way to give himself a legacy. What would set this one apart from the French exhibitions is that they would make it really big, really grand, and invite countries from all over the world to have a chance to show off their inventions as well. An amazing building was built for the 1851 exhibition, although unfortunately it isn't still standing to tell the tale. It was named the Crystal Palace and was truly an enormous and wonderful structure. It was designed to be built really quickly. It went from organisation to its grand opening in just 9 months, and it had been designed by a guy whose experience was in building greenhouses. The Crystal Palace was kind of a giant greenhouse. It was made of 60,000 panes of glass. Walking around inside it, you don't need any lights because there's so much natural light coming in. And it's a really special and different kind of design. Being a kind of greenhouse, it also did get very hot inside, which did become a problem when we had an enormous number of guests coming through. Here's a virtual tour of inside of the Crystal Palace. Now imagine this filled to the brim with inventions and machines and raw materials and diamonds and gems and all kinds of impressive things that each country wanted to show off. It also included art and sculptures and woven mats, fountains, and the very best of science at the time. It was a tech expo, but also a celebration of design. It was a chance for countries, including Britain, to show off, but also to provide the world with a sense of hope. It was a chance to show that technology could lead to a better future. Plenty of famous people attended this event, including the Queen and her family, but also Charles Darwin and Michael Faraday, who was helping to judge the exhibits. There were also famous writers including Charlotte Bronte, Charles Dickens, and Lewis Carroll. In addition to them, it was all the who's who of people in London and internationally. In fact, so many people walked through the doors, it was nearly a third of the entire British population at the time, about 6 million people. The contract to supply food and drinks was won by the now well-known name Schweppes. The company constructed a crystal fountain at the event, which still forms part of their logo. I found this book here all about the event and complete with some beautiful drawings. It says that the greenhouse design was so special, it turned what could have been a dull industrial event into a fairy tale. The building of it was so interesting and people kept coming to have a look, so the contractors started charging people to do so. From this money, they formed an accident fund. It took a huge portion of the entire country's glass supply, but somehow they managed to pull it off. There were serious concerns though. People weren't sure about its safety. Something like this had never been built before, although it wasn't supposed to be permanent. It was only supposed to stand a few months, long enough for the exhibition to take place. People were worried that, like many greenhouses, the water vapor would condense and then fall back down onto the goods inside, that everything would be waterlogged and saturated. They were also worried that the refraction of light from so many panes of glass could start a fire. They didn't know if a hailstorm would cause a smashed glass death trap or even blow the building over. But as a way to prove some of the safety before opening night, 300 of the workers were made to jump up and down on portions of the building in front of the Queen and the Prince to prove it wouldn't fall down. Things actually worked out pretty well for the building until its later demise, but we'll get to that. Let's take a look at some of the exhibits that were held inside. There were carriages, including one that was constructed to lay down rails and pick them up again as it went. There was a portable steam engine and a portable fire engine. There was a vegetable washer and a silent alarm clock which, quote, turns your bed on its side at any given hour. There was also this very, very creepy one here called Smith's Comic Electric Telegraph. It was amongst an array of inventions to show that electricity could be used to transmit a signal between two distant places. This one, however, probably looks nothing like the other ones in this category. It might even be one of the first entries to the uncanny valley. The eyes and the mouth of it move through a process of magnetic induction. The inventor has come up with a telegraphic alphabet that represents all the letters of the alphabet in a novel way. It seems that you can touch the corresponding keys on this kind of keyboard in front of the figure, and that is translated to appear as unique movements of the face. I found this interesting sentence in the description of clothing that was on display. It says, there was the usual buttonless, reversible, self-sustaining, self-opening, ventilating, one-piece, and even mathematical underwear. There was a knife with 300 blades, and one item that received a medal for being especially impressive was the expanding figure of a man, which contained 7,000 parts, and when you turned a handle, it changed from life-sized into gigantic proportions. The Victorians seem to place a lot of value on works that obviously took a lot of time to make. This might be displayed through intricate or just especially clever designs. That's even seen here on these scissors. These might seem like a simple thing, but here they are still seen as works of art and are in fact an example of restricted design. This might look like a normal chair, but I don't recommend that you sit in it because it's actually made of paper mache and is more of a decorative piece of furniture rather than a functional one. This one appears to be a frog getting its beard trimmed and another walking by with an umbrella. The Americans sent the first revolver, designed by Samuel Colt, and also several examples of a newly found material called India rubber. There was a jacquard loom which could manufacture textiles and would change the textiles industry forever, but its use of punch cards to feed in algorithms also inspired computing and is a mechanism that we also saw in computers for a long time. A man called Alfred Charles Hobbs might have been the original lockpicking lawyer because he had an exhibition to demonstrate the inadequacy of several respected door locks. There were a few telescopes on display, including one that was used as a trophy. This page makes me realize the idea of the soda stream is quite old, with this device designed to carbonate beverages. And another bizarre invention was the Tempest prognosticator. It was something used to try and predict the weather, but it used real living leeches. It said that the leeches would become agitated by an approaching storm. They were kept in small bottles inside the device, and when they tried to climb out of the bottles, it would trigger a small hammer which struck a bell. The likelihood of a storm was indicated by the number of times the bell is struck. That seems like something out of a cartoon, really, but it's pretty fascinating that this actually existed. Over the 5.5 months that the Great Exhibition was open, 12 pickpockets were arrested in the act of stealing, 12 monocles were lost and never claimed, a person was born inside of the Crystal Palace, and over 1 million bottles of soft drink were sold. A lot of people loved the event and it breathed life into the whole city as well as the country. Not everyone loved it. There were plenty of skeptics, some who even refused to attend based on various objections. Charles Babbage, the one who invented the analytical engine, a precursor to computers, was so salty at this time over his own struggles to get funding for his projects that he wrote an entire book about all the reasons why he thought this event was a terrible idea. He wrote this book largely before the exhibition even opened, and it's just full of complaints that by the time this was published, no one had any time to do anything about. They range from very philosophical objections about the nature of selling things, to issues with the awarding of prizes, and even the way that press would cover science. Babbage might have disagreed with the committee's way of doing many things, and he might have considered this event to be a waste of money, but in fact the exhibition seems like it was very fruitful. The event was pretty successful and actually turned a profit. What they did with this profit was incredible. They used it to create various museums in London, which still stand today. The Victoria and Albert Museum, the Science Museum, the Natural History Museum, and even after all of that, they still had extra money that they used to set up an educational trust to provide grants and scholarships for research, and that also continues today. As I mentioned, the Crystal Palace wasn't made to be permanent, so eventually they did take it down. But they shifted it to a new location and rebuilt it bigger and better, this time intending for it to be permanent. This new location was in Hyde Park, and it stood there for a good while, before unfortunately burning down completely. Nearly 80 years after it was first built, a fire broke out in the administrative offices. Some workmen on site tried to put it out, but there were strong winds blowing, turning the entire structure into a kind of funnel. The flames shot up through the smashed glass to a height of 300 feet. A sight that all of London was able to see. By the morning, all that was left was molten glass congealed into great blocks and twisted beams of iron. The skeleton of the crystal fountain could be seen amongst the devastation, one of the only physical reminders of this incredible place. For many people, this would have been their only chance to gain a kind of glimpse into the world of technology and to see how the world was changing. It would have been inspiring and scary, and also practically just a really overwhelming experience to be there. I hope that we continue to see technology as something that can give hope for the future, that can change our lives in positive ways, and can inspire us.